So, what is happening here is these very deep, ingrained belief systems that we adopted during childhood are being mirrored back to us in the present moment. And it's creating almost like this dual reality. Hi, my name is Becky Jennings, and this is the Responsible Parenting Podcast. I give you the transformational tools to stop reacting to your children in the moment and start responding with intention. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Responsible Parenting. I'm talking about cycle breaking today and what happens when your village that's around your children doesn't approve of what you're doing. I did a reel a couple weeks ago and it went viral about cycle breaking. I had just spent time with my family, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and people were like, "Oh my God, that is exactly what I'm going through." So I figured, as opposed to a 90-second reel, I'll dive in a little bit more about cycle breaking, about the triggers you're experiencing, and kind of how to move through those moments. So, when we're experiencing these triggers in the moment with either our parents or in laws or people who were authorities to us, caregivers for us, it's almost like we don't know the root of the trigger in the moment. It's like our kids say or do something, and our parents sigh or give us a look, or they say something, and these things come like flying back from our subconscious. So, what is happening here is these very deep, ingrained belief systems that we adopted during childhood are being mirrored back to us in the present moment. And it's creating almost like this dual reality. We are seeing our childhood and we're seeing how we got reprimanded. We're seeing what was expected of us. We're seeing how we were treated. And we're also seeing our children and we're seeing the different path that we're taking, and it kind of all gets jumbled up together. Like, you might start to resent your kids for having it so good, or even start to believe that you're actually doing this wrong because like, quote unquote, deep in your gut what a proper kid should do. You know how you were supposed to act, and you knew what you were allowed and what you were not allowed to do. So it's like these subconscious beliefs about how children should be, right? Our relationship to this word should is keeping us in a cycle of pain. It's keeping us in sadness. Sadness is telling us that we need to mourn the loss of this ideal childhood, and that is giving us an incredibly heavy heart. So herein lies the choice that we have as humans. We can stay in this cycle of trigger, sadness, shame, blame, or we can say, I'm going to mourn the loss of the childhood I wish I had but never received. I would prefer it a certain way, but that's not happening. I'll tell you the story that I posted on my reel and went viral. My older son we were in Telluride for a week. And my older son was so loud. I know he was extremely excited. I know he was cooped up in a condo that didn't have all of the toys that he normally plays with. I know we got rained out for the festival that we were supposed to be at for I think it was 3 days we got rained out. He was being loud. He was playing Floor is Lava. He was making tons of animal sounds and spinning around in these really expensive chairs, which we definitely stopped, but he was spinning around and he was kind of like a feral caged up beast. But I watched my parents being visibly agitated by it. And all of these triggers were bubbling up inside of me because I would never have been allowed to do some of the things that he was doing. And by day 7, I was downstairs packing up, ready to go, ranting to my dad about how disrespectful my son is, how he doesn't listen, how he's so selfish, and how he's this and how he's that. And I was starting to believe that I was doing parenting wrong. I was starting to believe that what I did wasn't good, what I'm doing doesn't have value, that it's not important. And I started to believe that I was messing up my kids, that I was creating entitled monsters who just do whatever they want at the expense of other people. Even 2 days after the trip, when we were home and my parents were gone, I was still being visibly triggered left and right. And it wasn't because of the look from my parents or from the visible agitation and discomfort in their body language, because they weren't at the house. It was all these ghosts left over from the triggers that I had experienced the whole trip, kind of nudging me, saying, remember this? You see this? You're doing it wrong. And I had to go back to my basic principles. I had to remind myself of the job that I had set out to do differently as a parent. Number one, not to just keep them safe physically, but set them safe emotionally. Number two, that I was gifting them the toolkit to know how to live life, to not just slog through it and figure it out on their own, but I'm giving them tools of resilience. And number three, I am supporting who they are and who they're growing into, not who I want them to exactly be. I had to spend a lot of time, like a lot of time in thought and go back to my goals of the children that I wanted to raise. I had to look at all of these things that happened through, not through the lens of my triggers, not through the lens of my parents' triggers, but rather through the empowered awareness of what was really true. Was Flora's lava really that bad? When they were stuck inside the condo, when it's pouring rain and hail outside and they didn't have the toys that they are used to playing with, that their festival that they were going to attend to was completely rained out and they were playing tag. Was it really bad to be loud? Or was it completely developmentally appropriate for a 3 and a 6-year-old to act like this? Once I reframed and got back to my goal as a parent, I was able to soften. I was able to soften towards my children and soften towards myself and forgive myself for my reactions. And when I picked up my son from camp that day, I made a very meaningful apology. I told him that I had been wrong, that I had been triggered, and it was not his fault. That as I was growing up and stumbling through life, I wasn't able to do some of that stuff. But as I'm growing up now, and as I'm stumbling through this phase of my life now, I will always admit my faults and repair with him. I have another example of a cycle that I'm trying to break in my house and how I was able to shift that with my son. So, for example, perfectionism was not a bad thing in my house growing up. In fact, I was actually praised for my relentless efforts to get things right. It was a highlighted personality trait of mine growing up. Meanwhile, and the only reason I know this now is because I have done years of work on this specific trigger of perfectionism. But knowing now, I was deeply insecure as a child and exclusively sought external validation as my only measure for the value of who I am as a person. My perfectionism was a part of my people pleasing, and my people pleasing left me completely unaware of who I was and who I wanted to be in this world. I was on this endless hamster wheel of performance, perfectionism, people pleasing in order to know what I was supposed to do, in order to know what value I held, and all of my value as a child and arguably into my 20s and early 30s was wrapped into what other people thought of me. That is nothing that I want to instill in my children. I want my children to grow up knowing their value so deeply that they never have to resort to people pleasing or other sort of measures in order to gain that sort of self-acceptance. So my son was writing a story and he was spelling things the way they sounded, not the way they're actually spelled. And he got so mad that he couldn't do it perfectly that he threw his supplies down and he ran off screaming, "I'm so dumb." And it was like literally hit with this wave of my own self loathing and my own triggers of perfectionism when I was a kid and when I was so dumb that I couldn't figure out what to say when, somebody said something to me at class or I didn't know the answer. And it came flooding back like all this decreased value as a child when I couldn't spell as well as my peers. Now, on my quest to cycle break, this is actually a massive thing in my life. And so I used it as an opportunity to tell him this fact about myself. Because imagine you're a parent and you're doing all of this stuff for your kids seamlessly, perfectly. You're tying your shoes, you're making breakfast, you're driving places, you're organizing and packing for vacations. You are doing things perfectly. And they see this all the time. And they look at themselves struggling constantly. And so it's so easy to devalue yourself as a child when you see everyone around you doing it perfectly. Meanwhile, it's not true, but that's what you see. So I took this opportunity to tell him this fact about myself. I shared a story about how I messed up a homework assignment and the teacher shamed me in front of all of the class and how dumb I felt when everyone was staring at me and they were snickering and laughing at me. And I remember the exact homework assignment. I was 9 years old and I could tell you exactly the words I messed up on. I could tell you exactly the shame and fear that I felt in my face and in my body. And I also shared with him how easy it was for my brother. Again, this is the perception that we have around us as children. Could have been hard for him, but as a child, all I saw was how easy it was for my brother to get amazing grades, but how I had to fight tooth and nail to get there. And I shared with him that it's okay that he and I learn differently and that we learn at a different pace. And I told him that it's important, yes, to know math and to know how to spell in the long run, but that is just one part of this life. This is not your whole life. And that it's never supposed to get in the way of who you are as a person. It's never supposed to dull the shine of what lights you up. And it's never supposed to start to shift how you view yourself. So these are tremendous moments as parents to break these deep ingrained belief systems and patterns and cycles within ourselves, in our family units. And when your village doesn't approve of how you are doing it, go back to your basics. Go back to your basics and your principles of how you want to run this show. If it's safe, tell your village that you are going to do it differently. You're the parent. You get to call these shots. And if they don't like it, it's not up to you to meet their needs anymore. I've actually been surprised many times when I've offered feedback. It's been welcomed and accepted by parents and in-laws. But just like us who are trying to break cycles, it takes time to integrate these deep beliefs. We have to try to move beyond these really subconscious patterns, and it takes a lot of time. So go easy and go gentle. And when it doesn't happen the first time, the second time, the third time, the 50th time with your village, you get to create those boundaries. If it doesn't feel safe, you have every right to create the boundaries on the visits. You have every right to create what the visits look like. You have every right to say whether you're there or you're not. And if things don't go well, because they might, that is an absolute huge reality. This is an amazing opportunity for you to highlight your family values to your children. You can say, Grandma or Grandpa does it like this. That's how they were raised and that's what they know. We don't do it like that in our family because we believe in XYZ. Isn't it amazing that there are so many different people and there's so many different ways to do things? I do it this way because it feels better in my heart and body. How do you feel about what happened? This is an incredible opportunity for you to bring your child into that process, to teach them another skill, another life skill that they are going to experience left and right in their life about other people, other people's values and views, and how to live with that, how to accept what is, not take it on as your own, to people please, to make sure that everyone's feeling good and everyone's doing the right thing. So when you're triggered by parents, caregivers, in-laws, what lens are you viewing the situation through? Because we can only control ourselves and only control our reaction to the situation. So what is the lens you're viewing it through? Are you viewing it through your triggers? Are you viewing it through your parents' triggers? Or are you viewing it through awareness and acceptance of your child's developmental stage? Go back to your goals. Go back to your basics. Grab on to your grounding tool and model what you want to see in your family. I hope that helped. It wasn't the 90-second reel, and I hope that this gives you some empowerment, some strength, some validation that what you're doing is right for you and it is right for your family, and it is one step at a time. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Response Able Parenting Podcast. If you like what you heard, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. If you know someone who would benefit from this podcast, I'd be honored if you'd share the episode with them. Until next time, know that you are enough. You are capable. You've made it through all of your hardest days, and we will keep growing on this parenting journey together.